All right, good morning, everyone. Dr. Bogosian here. Welcome to Intro to Philosophy class. Today we are going to get into our material on the topic of free will and determinism. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to the shared screen view here in just a second. And while I'm doing that, I want you to hop over to Canvas and download the note sheet to follow along. That's going to help you not only learn the material and stay focused, but it'll help you on the upcoming exam. So here we go. Okay, sorry about that. Let me try that one more time. Didn't pull it up. Okay. That's more like it. All right. So again, our topic for today is free will and determinism. I'd like you to read these two questions and then pause the video to write down your answers before we jump in. Okay. So the questions are, what do you think it means for you or I, for a human person to be free with respect to any action that they perform? Question two, do you think we have, quote, free will? And what would that amount to, right? That's question one. And why or why not? Why do you think we might make some free choices? Why do you think we do not have free will or make free choices? So go ahead and pause the tape, jot your answers down, and then we're going to continue. There are basically three views of human action, okay, or three broad types of views on the debate about free will and determinism. So these are theories of human action or decision making. Number one, we're going to call it hard determinism. We're going to look at that today. If you read the introductory pages to the free will and determinism readings in our textbook, you'll see this defined. So I'm going to define some terms here at the beginning just to make sure we're using the same language all throughout. And so it's really important that you get this stuff down. So hard determinism, as opposed to soft determinism, which I'll mention in a minute, is the idea of probably what you think of when you think of determinism or predeterminism. It's the idea that all human actions, every single one, from what you eat to who you date, those are fully causally determined. And so there are no free actions or free choices. So full causal determinism, as we'll see in a minute, the causal determinism thesis is that the past states of the universe, past of your life, and all that combined, or if you're a theist, plus God's activity, combined with the laws of nature that are real, that currently exist, like gravity and so on, those combined guarantee any future state of the universe. Okay, so none of that is up to you or us, or you or me. And so all of our choices are just the byproducts of full causal determinism. They're effects over which we have no influence at the causal side of the effect. So they're just determined and not free. At the other end of the spectrum of views, you have, let's say, libertarianism. This is not the political philosophy, but libertarianism is a view about free will that is probably typically thought of as the free will view. This is the idea that at least some of our choices or actions are really free in a rich, robust sense. And so that means they're not fully causally determined. They could be causally influenced. Our past states of the universe could influence what the outcome, but they don't guarantee it. They don't necessitate it, okay? And so libertarians believe that there's a sense in which our choices are up to us. We make a causal contribution to them through deliberating or things like that. We'll get to that. The third view tries to navigate a middle way between 1 and 2. Compatibilists, I'm going to stick with compatibilism just to keep things neat and tidy, and that's a fair label. They're often called soft determinists, so they accept the causal determinism thesis, but then they want to attempt to argue that that is compatible with our making free choices. But the nature of a free choice is going to be different, as you'll see, than what libertarians have in mind. So again, human actions are fully causally determined and free at the same time. So we're going to look at a representative from each of these. The readings that were assigned had to do with hard determinism and libertarianism, and there are compatibilists in the book. I'm going to actually show you a brief interview with a contemporary compatibilist, Adina Roskis, and she is going to explain kind of how she integrates a physicalist view of the person with compatibilism. So again, I want to remind you of the previous lecture that was about philosophy of the human person, physicalism or materialism and dualism. And you're going to see how those views of the individual really derive a lot of what view a person has about free will, with some exceptions. By and large, you're going to see that libertarianism it doesn't hold to a physicalist view, but you could be a libertarian and a physicalist. Likewise, being a determinist doesn't mean you have to be a physicalist. There are people who are dualists who believe in determinism or compatibilism for that matter. So they don't always go together in a neat, tidy way. Welcome to philosophy. But you're going to see how, at least, and I'll make it explicit, how their background view of the person informs these three views. Now, a couple more terms. Incompatibilism, that is used in the introductory section of your book on this topic. I'm not going to use this after I define it here, but I want to get it on the table so we're aware of it. Incompatibilism just says that free will and determinism can't be brought together. So both hard determinists and libertarians of different kinds reject the compatibility of free will and determinism. So technically, they're both incompatibilists. They just go in opposite directions with it. The second important thesis we will mention a lot is the causal determinism thesis, and this is the idea that the way the universe is in the past, like yesterday, plus the laws of nature, guarantees what happens today. If we want to go all the way back to, let's say, the Big Bang or something like that, when the universe started, again, the system's front-loaded, it's determinism all the way down. There's no interference from the outside of this causally closed system, no interference from God or other supernatural entities or human beings making choices or souls or what have you. So here we go. What are the main issues in the debate that we're concerned about? Number one, we want to press the question, are we fully causally determined, just like the rest of the natural order seems to be, right? So when water falls on hardened soil, or when it falls on a plant, soil where there are things planted, there's an effect that is going to result whether we like it or not. Now, it can be interfered with, right? But it would have to be interfered with in an artificial sense. But naturally, it's just causally determined. When rain falls on the grass, it's going to grow, right? Or something like this. And the same thing goes for, if a human being is shot through the heart with an arrow or a bullet, right? The effect is going to be death. So here's the thing. Are we as causally determined as the rest of the natural order in terms of our action? And number two, what does a free action amount to? Compatibilists and libertarians are going to give different answers, but what's really important for us to critically think about is, does the answer one gives, or the account one gives of free choice, give us enough to pin down or establish how it is you or I is morally responsible for the choices we make, morally responsible for how we treat one another, morally responsible for whether we show up for work or not, et cetera, et cetera. So here we go. Let's start with hard determinism. Baron de Holbach, you need to read that paper. He argues that human beings are purely physical beings, and he uses his physicalism to drive his determinism. But again, you wouldn't have to be a physicalist to be a determinist. You could be a theological determinist and believe in the soul and so on. But he's a physicalist and a determinist. He believes those go tightly together, and they do. And here's a kind of a central quote in his article. The person is good or bad, happy or miserable, wise or foolish, reasonable or irrational, without their will being for anything in these various states. Nevertheless, despite of the shackles by which they're bound, we pretend that we're free agents, or that independent of causes by which we're moved, he determines his own will and regulates his own conditions. Okay, put it in a sentence or two. Free will is an illusion. We believe we have free will, we pretend we have it, but really we are shackled by, we're bound by our DNA, our upbringing, the past states of the universe, and there's no way to reasonably consider that you actually make a free choice. Your will is determined, and therefore you're not free. So what is the will, we might ask? What does he mean by will? Well, for Holbach, the will is the modification of the brain. Okay, we'll unpack this, right? To act in one way or another. Now, how does the brain act, right? So you're not acting, it's your body is moving, right? It's responding to ideas that it receives, objects, right? Getting bonked on the head, or motives. Now, motives are interchangeable. By motive, he means desire, what you want. But as we'll get to with him, what we want is not up to us. We don't choose our desires. We find ourselves with them. One basic example here would be if you get thirsty, your desire to drink water to alleviate your thirst is not up to you. That happens to you. That's built, hardwired into the human system, we might say. So the desire to drink is a desire to alleviate thirst is something you happen to find yourself with at any moment in time. And that acts upon your brain, sending your brain signals and saying that you're thirsty, that you need to drink water or something to alleviate it. So what does this mean for an action? Well, if actions are the necessary result, right? They're the effect. Necessary, that's a key word. That's really strong. Actions are necessitated by impulses that our brains receive that dispose us to do X or Y. But X or Y aren't really live options that we can choose between. We choose either X or Y because of modifications of the brain, right? But in the form of impulses, desires, motives, if you will. Excuse me. Objects, ideas that make us do whatever we do, if you will. So let's put this in a picture. On the causal side of like an if-then statement, motives or desires are the full causes, right? And those desires can be partially formed in us. They could also be determined by our DNA, our human biology, our upbringing. But then those necessitate what we call an action or a choice, and that is the effect. Cause and effect. We are as part of the system of cause and effect as everything else in nature. Now, why I think this is true? He gives an argument, and he goes like this. We are physical systems that function in accordance with the necessary laws of nature. Our physical brain receives impulses in the form of desires. So that's central here. Ideas can also be a part of that. But desires, wants, right? Motives dispose us, right? They don't just incline us or draw us. They actually dispose us to act in order to conserve our very lives. Dispositions aren't up to us. They're not under our voluntary control. We don't choose our dispositions, right? We don't choose our motives, our desires. We find ourselves with them. So step one of the argument, motives aren't up to us. But if our motives aren't under our control, and motives are what cause our actions, right? Necessitate our actions, well, then our actions aren't under our control. And this just is another way to say our actions are determined. They're not voluntarily chosen. We don't really deliberate, even if we think we do, deliberate and voluntarily choose to watch this video. Now, there are two objections to Holbach's argument. First is you can go back and circle premise 3 on your sheet. One objection to premise 3 is that we actually have a real conscious awareness of deliberating between live options. But how we explain why we choose what we choose in light of that deliberation, we don't just cite desires. We might cite desires, but we also cite reasons in additions to desires to say that psychologically, right, reasons plus desires are what help us bring about an action, but reasons are the result of our own intending and deliberating or attending to certain evidence, right, or reasons, and then saying, hey, that's the reason I'm gonna use to act. So if we really deliberate, if we really say, okay, I could have the salad option or the burger option for lunch, and then you think about, well, okay, my health coach told me I should eat this more salad and less meat, but I really want the meat, but I really want to be healthy. Okay, we're gonna get to this. Now you got a competition of wants, right? Well, reason in this objection can come in and be the final sort of arbiter between desires. And so if that's the case, well then it's not the case that we only act on the basis of desire alone. And therefore maybe we do have some sense in which our choices are up to us. Objection number 2, if hard determinism is true as Holbach says, then it's hard to see how we're morally responsible for any actions. We're just dancing to our DNA. It's not our fault. Nothing's our fault ever. Yes, I said a mean word to you that hurt your feelings, but I couldn't help myself, right? I'm just dancing to my DNA. This is the result of everything that's ever been done to me or the physical constitution I have. And so you can't punish me because I'm not responsible because I couldn't do it anyways. I'm off the hook. Now, this concern about moral responsibility, right, is what drives people to compatibilism, because compatibilists want to say that we're responsible. We have to not just, what determinists end up having to say is, well, pragmatically as a society, we have to put people in prison who are really violent because that's bad for the herd. But notice that's not really moral responsibility. That's social pragmatism. And so compatibilists say, no, we need something more than that. You really are responsible for what you do in most cases. Now, there are cases where you're forced or coerced or manipulated, and then you're not responsible. And we can make these distinctions. We hold children to a lesser degree of moral responsibility because of what we can justifiably expect them to know and understand. And so they may not know, for example, that it's not okay to walk in someone's garage where they see something that they're curious about. So we don't take them, haul them off to a juvenile detention center, right? Because they may not know any better. Now, if they're 15 and they know better, well, then it's a different story, right? But if they're 5, we don't. But that's very different than, let's say, even the 30-year-old, right, who's got lots of life experience and has a driver's license, and we can justifiably hold them accountable for them driving a certain way, versus someone with a learner's permit. All right. Compatibilists want to work with that moral intuition we have, those distinctions, and say, we're responsible for the bulk of our actions, unless it's a case of psychosis or psychopathy and we really couldn't control our actions. But that's the rare exception to the rule, which is, in the usual case, we decide what we want to eat, we decide how we treat one another, even if it is the result of habits we have chosen to form, bad habits or good habits. So compatibilists, I'm going to have you watch this interview with Adina Roskies. There's a really good free website, Closer to Truth, where they interview philosophers from different philosophical perspectives and worldviews, religious and non-religious alike, on life's ultimate questions. And so this is a really good, I think, interview that will help you hear from a compatibilist how she tries to reconcile being free in some sense with being determined. So let's watch this and then we'll come back together.
Adina, in trying to understand consciousness, free will is one component of it. And there's a big challenge to free will from my old colleagues in the brain science community, the neuroscientists. And it has many directions. It attacks it from a philosophical point of view, from some claims in neurophysiology and brain stuff, and even from a legal point of view. So how do you look at the whole issue of what's happening in the rapid development of neuroscience and the concept of free will?
I actually think I'm rather deflationary, because I can't think of any experiment that I've seen that makes me disbelieve in free will. I think every single experiment that's claimed to do that just has significant flaws in terms of what it actually shows us. It doesn't show us anything about free will. It might show us that our brains are active when we are conscious and acting.
But what would you expect?
But what would you expect? Exactly. And I think the Libet experiment is exactly that. What would you expect except to see brain activity preceding our awareness of our actions? Because awareness requires brain activity. There are functional MRI experiments that purport to show that we can predict people's behavior 10 seconds in advance. But all they do is give you a slight statistical increase over chance. So instead of being purely at chance predicting people's behavior on a forced choice, you can predict 55 or 56%.
Now that sounds significant, because
it is significant in the sense that
it tells you something.
Tells you something, and what it tells you is there's something about your brain. So there's information in your brain that has relevance to your future decisions. But again, what would you expect? If you take me to dinner and you ask me, would I take the chocolate mousse or the creme brulee? I know even now what I would do, right? There are preferences. Well, okay, if that's one of the options. I have preferences. Those are presumably encoded in my brain. I also have memory of what I did last if I'm doing some repetitive task. I might be thinking, boy, I pressed right 3 times in a row. Maybe it's time to press left. All kinds of things are going to have some kind of trace in my brain, and they also have some bearing on what I do in the future. So I don't think that experiment tells us we don't have free will. It tells us there's information in our brain that is relevant to our future action, and I would expect nothing less.
Well, free will is a general concept, but we see today the prefix neuro being applied to a lot of different disciplines: neuroethics, neuroeconomics, neurotheology. So we see neuro being applied to a lot of things, and in many of them there is this sort of predictive sense that what you think is existing in reality is not, because it's sort of a pre-programmed thing in your brain. How do you react to all of that?
Yeah, I reject the last part. So I don't think that the fact that there's some physical aspect and maybe even a temporal aspect to our choices or our behaviors, et cetera, none of that shows that those aren't real choices or real behaviors. I think it's just clear that we are physical systems and we're causal systems, and nothing about those particular facts, I think, should make us doubt that we have free will or that we have mental states or that we really act or we really choose. So I think that there's actually a problem in that the neuroscientists don't really understand the philosophy, and they jump to philosophical conclusions, but they really, those conclusions that their little bit of data shows that we lack this general capacity just isn't warranted.
Could it be that the reason that you think that free will survives is that you have deflated the concept of free wills and feel very philosophically good about it? So yes. It's not like you feel
sanctimoniously deflationary.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not like you've done something evil. You feel good because you've analyzed it philosophically. It's compatible with this and that and the other thing. And therefore, what your concept of free will is actually not that different from what the neuroscientists say can't happen, because you've deflated from free will to what they're saying is not free will. So it's the same thing.
That's, I think, a fair question to ask. I actually think that I have a little bit more to stand on than that, because I think that if you really probe that concept, that folk concept that many people have, it's an incoherent concept. That is, it's inconsistent, and there is nothing that could be exactly that. And so what I like to think about myself working on is trying to take that concept and finding something that is pretty close but possible. That I think we have.
So what you're trying to do is not deflate free will, but inflate free will to as big as it can be, but still be real.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Those people who think that you need souls will not be happy with what I've done. And those people who think you need uncaused causes also won't be happy with what I've done. But I don't think either of those are realistic things to pin free will on. And actually, Bertram Malley has just presented some really interesting work showing that people's concept of free will doesn't seem to be hinged on souls or uncaused causes. So if he's right, then I'm not really doing violence to what people really think free will is in some, if you probe it empirically. It's just this intuitive nasal.
I don't think that matters. I don't think that matters at all.
What
people think.
We want to know that we're talking about the same thing.
We do want to know we're talking about the same thing, but I would like people who understand what it means to define it, not what common people think, because what is, I mean, that's an interesting question on its own, but I don't think that it should impinge on this discussion.
Well, what we want to do is try to at least create continuity between the historical tradition of discussing free will and what the guy on the street thinks that he has or is lacking or worries about when we tell him that his brain works that way. So I think it's important to draw those connections, but ultimately I think that it's worth pointing out if there's an incoherent concept and at least laying out what the possibilities are for coherent concepts in the same vicinity.
Okay, let me pull up the PowerPoint again here. I hope you found that interesting. Again, a couple of key points are: notice that she's a physicalist about the person, but unlike Holbach, she doesn't think that that requires a kind of determinism about free will. Number two, she thinks, again, where the compatibility comes in is she thinks there's, even though there's predictive ability of what you will do, knowing what you will do is insufficient for saying that you will in fact have to do that. That's an interesting claim. But she doesn't think that you need to swing over to saying that free will kind of comes in out of nowhere, right? Uncaused cause. That'll be, we'll talk about that next. That's an option that comes up in Roderick Chisholm's libertarian view, or souls, right? Instead, she wants a physicalist view of person, but she thinks free will is basically this idea. So let me put it this way. She starts with moral responsibility, right? Well, how do we get moral responsibility on her view or a compatibilist view? It's if we could have avoided the action. We'll go to her dessert example. Could she have avoided eating the particular dessert that she knows she would eat? Sure. She could have avoided it by choosing a different one. Well, how do you choose a different one? Well, had we chosen differently, you would have avoided the action in question, right? Well, how do you do that? Well, all the sequence of, causes going into her, let's say, decision-making system, had her past been different leading up to the action, let's call that past two. So past one is what leads to eating the chocolate cake. Past two is what leads to eating the creme brulee. But if past one is the one that's actualized, you might say, well, could she have chosen differently? Well, in some sense, no, right? Because she knew she would do that, and so did whoever's studying her. But strictly speaking, she could have chosen differently. How? Well, not at the moment she gets the dessert options on the platter, right, in the restaurant. Instead, past two would have had to have been real. And that's possible. She could have been a little bit different. Her parents could have raised her a little bit different. And then past two leads to her, eating creme brulee. That being necessary. But notice what's different there. The libertarian is going to insist that what makes freedom free, or free choice, free will really free, is that at the moment of action, there's like this garden of forking paths. Things could go in different directions. For Adina Roski's, that's not the case. The way you get free choice, freedom, is if the choice could have been a different one, but it's not a different one that could have happened at the moment of action. It's a different one that could have been a result because of a different past leading to a different action, but it's still a linear, right, thing. Past one leads to action one, past two leads to action two. Now, with all that being said, then, she thinks we could have avoided the action even though it was fully causally determined. Not avoided it at the moment of action, but avoided it because of some, let's say, alternate reality, right? Now, that leads to some objections. If causal determinism is true, then you can't really change the past. You have no choice, though, over past one or past two is what's real. And so ultimately, you have no choice over any action, right? Because you don't have power over the past, as we say. You didn't have any, say back when past one or past two gets going for you. And so if you don't have any choice over your past, any power over your past, you can't avoid any action you undertake on any line you land on. And so you can't avoid any of your actions. None of those are up to us at any reality, at any point in your life. And so what this starts looking like to libertarians is that you're just as determined on compatibilism as you are on hard determinism. The only difference is it's not determinism all the way down. It's just determinism most of the way down once a certain pass gets going, but you don't have any influence at any point in time anyways. And so the bottom line here is, even if something else could have occurred, right? Let's say when you ate lunch today, it's not literally the case that you could have chosen to do otherwise at any point in your history or at any point, right, occurring right now or any future moment. So I want you to pause the tape, or pause the video, if you will, right? And think about these questions. What do you make so far of hard determinism versus compatibilism? Does the problem of freedom and responsibility remain for the compatibilists, and we need to look to libertarians to kind of give us a better view? Or do you think that Adina-Roskis and the compatibilists have given you a satisfying answer? Yes or no, why or why not? All right, let's quickly recap, and then we're going to wrap up the rest of our time by looking at Roderick Chisholm's paper on his version of libertarian free will. Hard determinism about human action says that we are determined to make any choice we make, therefore we're not responsible. Compatibilists say, no, we need responsibility intact, and so we're going to say that we're free, but freedom is just that something else could have occurred only if a different past had brought about a different present, and so on. Libertarians say that's not enough, right? We need something more to pin down moral responsibility. And going back to the philosopher Aristotle, he didn't call himself a libertarian about free will, but remnants of this view is in his philosophy. He says, look, a staff moves a stone, and the stone is moved by a hand, which is moved by a person, a human being. All right, so here's my makeshift staff, my clicker, and then my water bottle. It's pushing the water bottle, right? Here we go. But then we might ask, well, what's pushing, how is it that the clicker is pushing the water bottle? Well, this causal chain, right, has to stop somewhere. The buck stops somewhere, and it stops with an agent, a causal agent, a being, not an inanimate object or another event. And that agent is the one who has power to initiate on their own new causes that bring about new effects, or initiate new causal events. But they themselves are not just an event, okay? Libertarians believe that there are two kinds of causes, at least. We might call them events that cause other events. So the event of a rock being thrown towards a window is the cause of the effect of the window breaking. Those are two events. One event causes another. But now we might say, well, what about agents? That is, moral beings, right? Personal beings like you and I. Well, we have brain events like we talked about, mental events, but are we just a bundle of events? Roderick Chisholm says no. We do have events that occur. Thoughts are mental events. Brain, the brain experiencing pain or pleasure. But is there a sense in which we are sort of where the buck stops, where we can initiate events, but are not just an event ourselves? And he says, yes, you, the agent, the I, or center of consciousness, the ego, if you will, from Sigmund Freud, you are a causal agent, and you have the ability to do otherwise at the moment of action. And at the moment of action, you deliberate between real live options. And all that's needed here is you could either choose A or refrain from it. You don't need to have 15 options to have free will, or even 5. You could either choose to go to class or choose to not go to class, right? Choose to eat the burger or choose to fast. The ability to do otherwise is really important. It's up to you which one you choose on the basis of reasons and desire. And so he starts with more responsibility like the compatibilist, but thinks that we need something more for more responsibility than compatibilism. Here we go. If we're responsible for our actions, then we must be the primary cause of them. Not the secondary cause, not just an effect. We need to be the one that causes our action that brings about the effect. Because now think of the moral intuition here. When we hold someone morally accountable for hitting their brother or sister, we say, look, this is what you did. We don't say this is what your DNA made you do, or this is what your brain made you do. We say this is the action you performed. You're responsible for it. you're the owner of it because you caused it, right? You caused the action which caused the harm to your sibling. Premise two, if we're the primary causes of our actions, then desires can't tell the whole story. They can't be the full causal explanation of our actions. Therefore, if we're responsible for our actions, desire can't be the causal explanation. Well, what else is there? Reasons, right? You work through an argument, you work through reasons. Why did you choose the burger over the salad? Well, here's my reason. Now, desire might figure into the reason, but it's the reason plus the desire that explains what the effect. All right, now why I think this argument's sound? Roger Chisholm says there's a clear metaphysical and moral difference between a person shooting someone deliberately, and someone being forced to do that. Okay? If a person is forced to rob a liquor store or forced to shoot someone, they are doing it against their will or contrary to what they would voluntarily choose, right? And so if force circumvents the will of the person who's forced, goes around it, manipulates it, pushes it against what they really want and reason to be best, and that's why they're not responsible. But on the other hand, if we intend or set out to do certain things, intention implies that we had some kind of prevision and plan, and we are plotting how to bring about the effect, right? How to make happen what happens. And so we deliberate between genuine options. We go, man, I really intend to go to this concert with a friend when this whole pandemic is done. Well, then you figure out how to make that happen, right? You arrange transportation, when you need to leave, how much it's going to cost, what you're going to wear, etc. And there are options through all of that, right? Are you going to take their car or public transportation? Are you going to hire an Uber? Are you going to wear this outfit or that outfit? Okay. Now, if they say, well, hey, why'd you wear that to the show tonight? You don't go, well, my beliefs and desires made me do this. No, you say, well, this is what I wanted to do. Well, I thought this was the coolest outfit. I thought this was the one that really rocked, or whatever you say, right? Maybe it fit the part for the night. But it's you, the person or the agent, that has the beliefs and desires, right, that inform your decision, but you are the one who chose. Now, there are objections to libertarianism. Number one, someone might say, well, what if our desires cause us to act? Analogous to like when there's a lot of rainfall and it's so much that the dam that's supposed to hold the water back gets overwhelmed by the amount of water, and the dam breaks and floods the town below. You don't blame the dam, right? You don't say, man, that dam is no damn good, right? To play on words. No, we blame who or what? We blame the people who built it. This happened in our own state, right? A year or two ago when we had all that rainfall and then all the melting, right after winter. I think there was at least one dam that broke because it had been maintained as it needed to be by the local government. And so people were blaming who? Not the dam or the rainfall. They were blaming the people involved or who were responsible for maintaining the dam. So maybe our actions are like that, right? Where desires just overtake us and we have no power, we're powerless against them. And here's Chisholm's reply. He says, well, wait, okay, sure, desires, right? We've all experienced where we just feel this pull, right? Oh, I gotta have another dessert, or oh, I really wanna punch them in the face for saying that to me, or oh, I just wanna unfriend everybody who holds views different than me on social media. Okay, but we can still step back, right, so to speak, and think about, reflect on our impulse there, our desires about what we wanna do. And we can actually acquire new beliefs about whether we should act on the basis of those desires or not. Maybe you're driving on the freeway and somebody cuts you off and you really feel like engaging in road rage and you want to ride their bumper and flash their lights and honk and flip them the bird. Okay, do you have to do that just because you feel that? No. You can actually sit back and go, huh, this could get someone killed, or I could get a ticket, or this is getting my blood pressure up. And this is where Roger Chisholm says what we can actually do is we can acquire new beliefs that are informing our road rage sort of impulse, that's not good. And then over time, we reform our character so that we routinely do behave differently when we drive or what have you. But where it all starts is right, with our deliberating and weighing and then retraining our thinking and feeling and acting. So we are free to deliberate about our desires and whether we should act on them. But there's a second objection to this view, and it goes like this. Well, okay, well, fine. Let's say we can actually change our character by deliberating and going back and changing our beliefs, so then we act differently. But then if we form our character over time and I become, let's say, a kind person and I used to be a not so kind person, well, then am I really free to not be kind? Could I ever just haul off and give you a piece of my mind, cuss you out or something? In fact, there's this famous quote from the Protestant reformer Martin Luther. And he said, when he nailed his 95 Thesis on the door of the Wittenberg Chapel, he said, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Now, you might say, well, that's just he's expressing his conviction. Others want to say this is an expression of that he wasn't free to not do that. He couldn't have said, I feel like nailing the 95 Thesis to make this statement, but I'm not going to do it. No, he had formed his character. He'd become the kind of person and formed his beliefs to where there was no other option for him, says the objection. Well, Roger Chisholm disagrees. He says this, he says, look, this isn't strictly speaking true, right? That he couldn't have done otherwise. He actually has the power to act from his character or act contrary to character. And we do this from time to time. Aristotle called this weakness of will. You know what's right and good. You know what's best or what you ought to do. Even you've done it 100 times, but now it's 101 time and you go, no, you know what? I'm not going to do that. And so we can still deliberate about whether our character is the best way we should act. This is, in fact, how people who find themselves in a habit that they're trying to change, what they have to now, the way you start undoing that habit is going, look, I don't actually have to do that. I have other options. And you can evaluate it, critically evaluate it, and act differently. Now, there's a third and final objection. One of the most common objections to the libertarian free will view is that if we're really agent causes of our actions, we initiate our actions. We're kind of uncaused causes, right? But that starts looking like free will is just random, like boom, out of nowhere, I make this choice. I can't causally explain the choice by brain chemistry or upbringing or the past that made it occur. It just sort of looks like it just randomly happens. But how can you be responsible for a random occurrence, right? You're responsible only if you really perform this action, right? And we can pin down why you performed it, says the objector. Roger Chisholm says, well, wait a second. You are responsible and it's not random because you, through your deliberations, deliberate and then causally bring about, right? You causally initiate, you are the prime mover of a brain event that leads to a bodily event that we call an action. Random happenings aren't prime movers of anything, right? They just occur. But a prime mover is somebody who has this sort of cognitive, rational, deliberative capacity that they exercise. And then when we do that, right, if you think about it, what you're going to do after this lecture, that's going to lead to you getting up out of your chair to go do something. But it all starts internally, where what you are the prime mover of is a brain event that leads to a causal sequence that we call a bodily behavior. So with all that in place, right, I'm going to wrap up for today because of in interest of time. I would encourage you to watch the movie Adjustment Bureau and ask yourself the question, what does free will have to do with it, right? Without spoiling it for you, in that film, the two main characters, Emily Blunt's character, Matt Damon's character, are wrestling with this idea that there's this overarching predetermined plan that they're to stick to. And they don't want to believe that they're determined. So what's the key piece there? Well, interestingly enough, love is a key piece. Does loving another person require freedom? I'll let you go watch the video to see what they imply. But what do you think? Is a libertarian free will view compelling to you? More compelling than determinism or compatibilism? Why or why not? Take care. Have a good day.